One of the things I think is important to consider with diversity and inclusion, and it tends to kind of keep us in a space of rhetoric opposed to transformation when we use those two terms. But for the purpose of even considering this and in our conversation today, when we think about diversity, it's often who is in the room. And then when we think about really when we think about equity, if I can just even position us there, equity is who's trying to get into the room, but they can't. So we're always kind of operating in our conversation around this room that people are either in or they're not in. And that really can be the context and the platform for so many different kinds of conversations we can have when we're thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think when you ask about a measurement, that again is contingent on what the goals of your organization are. So are you looking at understanding more about representation based on the available labor pool for your industry or your organization? Are you looking at the constituencies that you are serving, your customers, and looking at representation from that standpoint and trying to understand where there may be disproportionate gaps in your workforce and those two audiences or goals for the organization?
Thank you for explaining that and giving me a really good answer there. So I guess, what is the value of diversity?
Well, we really can't underscore enough the value and importance of having multiple viewpoints and experiences in our conversations, in our decision making, that influence the outcomes of what we're all trying to achieve in our companies and in our organizations and agencies around the community. I think it's also about understanding what's the risk of not having those voices in the room. What predictable patterns are we willing to forego to help us get at meaningful change and transformation? So that value just can't be underscored enough in terms of multiple points of view, multiple lived experiences that inform and influence our goals.
Thank you. And then I guess, like, how does a company know when it's adequately diversified? Like, when would they actually know that, hey, we do have a very diverse team, instead of just saying, hey, there are like 10 white people and then there's legit two people of color, if they're like Latino, blacks, whatever, those who are non-white, and those are like the 2 out of the 10. Would you say that's diversity?
Well, I mean, if you're focusing on numbers, and you start to look at, it kind of goes back to what I was just referencing. So if you're thinking about, we've got these 10 positions or these 10, openings, and if it's always about, I've got to have that split in half, whether it's 5 men, 5 women, 5 people of color, 5 white people, whatever that may be. That's at least people getting that opportunity to be considered, to be interviewed, to be hired, to be promoted. And that's critical. But it's also about, are they positioned for opportunity once they get there? Am I able to move up inside my organization or my agency? Do I have a sense of belonging in this organization now, not just because I'm here now, maybe in my case as a woman of color, but am I also being really valued and respected for my points of view? Can I speak up in the room and be supported and not feel like, my reputation or my role might be in jeopardy because I had a dissenting point of view? I mean, that could be for many people who are coming into this and not part of the homogeneous mainstream. So, where is there? Again, very dependent on who you're serving, what your goals are, the pool that you're drawing from. Those are other critical questions, I think, to support that. What does adequate measurement look like?
Thank you for that. And I guess, is Eerie Insurance at that level? Like, are many companies are in the level of being very diverse? Even in what I do, being a news reporter, in Erie, Pennsylvania. So do you think across the board in medical field, education, news, like everything, do you feel like it's diverse, especially with what you do in your company?
Well, we all have diversity, in our companies. Is Eerie Insurance a diverse organization? Yes. But there's still opportunities. We still have challenges. I mean, we think about the industry as a whole. We certainly are looking at, recognizing that the industry itself, is still largely white. And so when we break that down to, specific companies and ours, one of the things that I'm really gratified and grounded by in our organization is we've, established this function for the company over a decade ago, and it has persisted. And so we're maintaining a focus on what our opportunities are, but also celebrating the things that have been successful, like establishing stakeholder teams in our organization composed of leaders and employees who are helping us keep a focus on diversity and inclusion. And so, in that regard, I would say, we have been seeing success there, but we know we still have room to grow and more to do. And what has been happening, in our community, in our country, certainly in this past year, especially, it has certainly reinforced the critical work that is still in front of us. The veil has definitely been lifted, and we know that we have to continue to roll up our sleeves and do that hard work.
I love that. Continue rolling up your sleeves. I guess, like, what do companies, police departments, fire departments, governments, etc., need to do to successfully improve diversity? And especially when it comes to government and law enforcement. I mean, clearly from what we've seen the past year, this year, and not only just this decade that we're in right now, it's mostly like the past decades and historical events that has been happening for centuries, I would say, for, goes way deep. So I guess how would, these organizations, or I guess like institutions, you would say, improve diversity? I guess, like, how can they get there? How can we all get there?
Yes, when you speak about, this systemic and pervasive, racism, these inequities, they have been going on, to your point, hundreds of years. And, while we recognize that we're in the middle of a contemporary racial reckoning, and we're in, the new era of a civil rights movement. So we're not dealing with new questions and issues. We're dealing with the fact that because that veil has been lifted and more people now see and understand exactly what so many of us have been experiencing for so long and talking about, now there has been certainly much more rigor and, I think, more accountability that can be expected to come from that. If we are trying to be prescriptive about what's the solution, for some of the agencies, that you mentioned, it always, to me, comes back to acknowledging equity. It means acknowledging that there has been a system of an inability to access, from a fair standpoint, people to get into these kinds of jobs, to be considered for them. So, when we remove the inequities, we remove those barriers and make it so that everybody is coming from a level playing field to apply for and be considered for these opportunities, that is going to be an indication of us having definitely made a severe and significant, shift in the right direction for transformation and opportunity. But it has to be a real examination of policies and programs and protocols that have been lingering for so long, that have made it nearly impossible, difficult for people to take on these opportunities and to take on these jobs and have meaningful employment, to be gainfully employed across all of these sectors in our community.
Thank you. And so I guess, how does a company accomplish inclusive leadership?
Well, it does stem from, looking at the pool, the workforce inside your organization. So if you are drawing, on leaders from inside your organization, it's looking at the opportunities and the texture and profile of those who are going to be moving into those roles. I think the inclusive piece of this as well, in terms of being an inclusive leader, is recognizing the role and responsibility that you play and the power you have in terms of hiring people and promoting people and sponsoring people and mentoring people. Those are the things that I think really enable leaders to be inclusive. When they're doing all of those things, they know that they're being watched, they're being observed. So how are you modeling all of these examples of how to invite and involve and engage people in all the ways that you have in your sphere of influence inside your organization? And that may also be beyond your organization. We also know that leaders are doing things that aren't always and only inside an organization. So the ways that they are showing up in community roles and community leadership opportunities as well, it's the same idea. How are you applying all of these ways of helping us get better when you do these things as a leader?
Thank you. And I guess the difference between like qualifications versus diversity, are they mutually exclusive?
There are bona fide occupational qualifications, for jobs. There are requirements for jobs. So no matter what, this is what is necessary to do the job. So when we think about that for requirements and qualifications, and then it's really, I think, not so much about qualifications versus diversity, but then it's about qualifications versus preferences. So preferences are those things that are added in that might distinguish or differentiate a candidate from another in the execution of how a job is done. But those preferences, again, can be a way of screening out or filtering out people. And you have to ask yourself, is that still going to be an indication of whether somebody can do this job? What are their capabilities even longer term? Are those preferences going to be the same things that continue to marginalize people and filter them out of job opportunities? So it really is about these qualifications that are critical for the job versus preferences that are more discretionary and added in, and can, again, many times be a way to sustain, this situation and this situation we face around people who are people of color, Black people, who are not able to competitively, apply for opportunities.
Yeah. So would you say in sometime in this future, maybe we will start to see lots of diversity in the workforce instead of just having that one or two or just that one person of color in a room filled with those who are not people of color? So do you feel that, or do you see yourself that we will get there where there will be lots of diversity in the workforce, especially with my generation, because I'm 23 years old and I grew up in Brooklyn, New York City. And how I grew up, I was, surrounded by so many diverse people, Latinos, Russians, Italians, Blacks, you name it, I was around it. So just coming from where I came from, and, I personally see that there will be at some point, especially with my generation, we tend to be very vocal with things and trying to get things done and, trying to do what's right. I personally think that it will get there at some point. It's just that we still have those who are in these high positions that may not necessarily want change and just want the old-fashioned way because they may be still stuck in that mentality of their era.
Well, yeah, I'm glad you brought that question up. The short answer is yes. Do I believe there will be more diversity, meaning more representation of color, of people of color in companies? Yes. I think it's interesting because I do often hear people talk about, well, the next generation, the younger generation, they're more diverse. They already think this way. They're going to solve our problems. And my challenge there is I absolutely love, having young people who are standing really on the front lines and advocating for and fighting for diversity and equity and justice, because we need everybody involved in this. But when we say that, though, when some people suggest that future generations, next generations, these ones coming up now are going to be the ones who are going to make the changes for us, what that does is it absolves all of us right now of doing our part as well. So we can't just wait for the next generation. We've got to work alongside the generations, all of us. I'm a Gen Xer. I think about, my peers. I think about baby boomers. We're all still in the workforce together right now. We're living among each other in our communities. So it's not about, waiting for the next generation. It's about propping them up to be successful in their part of this journey to justice moving forward. But it's about how do we play our parts as well? How do we assume the roles and responsibilities and really the obligations that are in front of us today, to do this work and make it meaningful and to make it last, to make it real. Because what I do believe is, with what we have experienced more recently, if we don't make real changes now, it's going to be hard to be optimistic about the future. There are so many people that, are recognizing and learning. I mean, so many more people now, and I'm talking about allies here, our white allies who are learning and seeing, what is it that I need to do to play my part, alongside, people of color as we're moving forward. So there's got to be full engagement of everybody and not shifting off responsibility to, a single group to take the work on. We all own it.
No, you're fine. Sorry, I just have like a colleague of mine who's doing like a separate Zoom interview and she's listening and she's agreeing. But so I mean, but also what we're seeing with like what happened to the Capitol, and like we're seeing, these like what people call it extreme groups or whatever you want to call it. I call it differently. I see it how it is, but other people want to kind of sugarcoat things. But anyways, and you see that there were people who are in these high class jobs, who are in these like either law enforcement, government, or just regular ordinary people, and they have, either they're like a manager or HR person and stuff like that, and they did what they did at the Capitol. I guess, like, what do you have to say with that when it comes to, companies trying to make their company diverse and stuff like that, but then we're seeing those who work for that company and those who are in those high positions, like were involved, what we saw on January 6th. I guess, what do you have to say to that?
Yeah, January 6th, like several other dates that we have experienced, it's certainly one that I know I'm not going to forget. Very difficult and painful. And I think, you're living, under a rock if you don't realize that so many people who are living and working among us, have very, firm beliefs and views on things. And so if we think that everybody in our organizations all believe the same thing, I mean, that's not our reality. And so when you witness something like what we saw with the insurrection, and, seeing people from, different walks of life in terms of what they may do for a living, where they live, it's hard not to know that, there so many different people, and again, different viewpoints are all among us. And that's what makes it so important for us understand more about, what our responsibility is to create transparency and to create dialogue, which we aren't always willing to have. It's so hard to do, to have dialogue, across lines of difference when it's as deep as what we have seen in terms of these, kind of polarizing, points of view. So to think about seeing a way forward, it's going to be about, again, being vulnerable, being exposed, and creating, more platforms and opportunities to have conversation, to create understanding. It's not always going to be about changing somebody's mind, and I think if we come from that place, we will be disappointed many times. But it's about providing information. It's about creating factual, data points for people, and helping us get to a place where we have much more of an understanding of what is real and what is not. And that's, again, very, very hard work to do. I don't feel that this stands in the way of organizations still doing what they need to do to create, these workforces and leadership pools that are representative from a racial and gender standpoint. It doesn't mean that we don't do that because it's hard or because of what happened. I think, you know, it becomes even more important and it becomes even more urgent. I mean, we are in an acute state of awareness, right now. So if we don't do our part to take advantage of, what's in front of us, shame on us.
Perfect. Anything else would you like to say?
I just, Black History Month is always a really important time to just, reflect on, you know, our history, our legacies. And it's an important time to kind of preserve and promote that. I would also say though that, we cannot relegate the learning to, 1 month. We want to continue to have conversations. We want to continue to have panel discussions and interviews that occur outside of, these 28 days. We really want to be moving towards, a national understanding of why, Black history is American history, and the opportunity here also to just make sure that it's becoming more fully integrated into what we do, and how we move forward. So I'm always, personally, grateful, to have this month, as a point of pride, racial pride, for me as a Black woman, for sure. But, I'm also advocating for us to have these conversations all of the time because they're so, so necessary and vital in transformation and transparency. So I think it's important to just take a moment and reflect on that.